My mother and father lived in Brooklyn at that time. They'd been married for 3 years. He was hoping to be a successful politician and for the Republican Party and in 1926. But they decided to move to Scarsdale, New York, and a suburb of New York. And they moved, and my brother was born 2 years later in White Plains, and then they bought an old house, part of an old estate, which was very near the Boston Post Road. And there were no paved roads going in by this house. You had to walk in on dirt roads to the house. But eventually they finished developing that area, and they built a school for that area, and the whole area was called Fox Meadow. Fox Meadow School still stands. They built a big addition onto it,
Yeah.
but it still stands. It was a block from my house, so I could walk to school every day.
What is your earliest childhood memory?
I remember a lady came with some other people, and my brother said, "Who is that pretty lady?" He's 2 years younger than I am. "Who is that pretty lady?" And I said, "That's our mother." And she'd been gone for 2 years in a TB sanitarium, trying to recover from TB, and she'd finally come home to her children. And I remember that she, most of the time, was in bed upstairs in her room, and if I wanted to talk with her or be with her, I could sit right on the bed with her. And we went through the next, it would have been next 10 years before she died.
Do you remember where you were on Pearl Harbor Day?
Pearl Harbor Day was 1941, right?
Correct.
So I could have been at school in the 7th or 8th grade at the Scarsdale High School. It didn't have, to tell you the truth, I don't remember the day at all. I don't remember making notification of it or anything. I think what I knew about it was pictures on the front of magazines, like Life magazine, or because there was no television, so I couldn't see it, but I could listen to the radio, but I don't remember listening to the radio, but I do remember seeing pictures on magazines. I'll tell you what I do remember, which had nothing to do with Pearl Harbor or Japan. But the history teacher had a class of social studies, and the history teacher said, I remember this so clearly. He said, I have a forecast for you. I'll tell you what's going to happen. The Russians are going to attack the Japanese because of the islands north of Japan. They argue about who owns those islands, and there's going to be a war in that end of the Soviet Union. And I remember thinking that waiting for it to happen.
Yeah.
I also remember what my line was in the French. We were taking French language. They were trying an experiment where they would start us in 7th grade with French and go right through to 12th grade. And my line was, I was the elephant. And my line was, Il va pleuvoir. It's going to rain. It must have been a story of the Noah's Ark. Anyway, that was that's things I remember. I don't. At home, my mother was in bed most of the time. Occasionally she'd have good times, and she'd get up and she'd get dressed and go to some fancy party with my father. He was extremely social. He was the supervisor of the town, which is like being the mayor of the town. He wasn't the mayor, but he was the supervisor, and he belonged to the Board of Supervisors for the County of Westchester. And what he was most proud of was putting in the parkways that ran up from New York up towards Albany. This old house that we lived in, part of it was built in 1840. And that was the house at that time. When they put an addition on the front of it, that became the dining room and the kitchen and the maids' quarters, the couple's quarters with their bathroom and their little bedroom. I do remember 1941, and that's when we declared war on Germany. That I do remember. And the reason that I remember it is in the house right next to us, which was a brand new house that had been built next to this old house, they had a cook who took care of the man and wife who lived there. And I didn't know the man and the wife, but I heard the cook was German. And when we declared war on Germany, she went down in the basement and hung herself. We kept track of the war because my mother was an Anglophile, and she really did a lot for the people in England. And I don't know why she was that way, but she was. Maybe her mother was. I know. No. My mother was born in Canada, and she became an American citizen when she married my father. And that's probably what her association with England was. Anyway, we knit socks, and we knit things to send to bundles for Britain.
When did you go to college?
I went to Smith College, again, because one summer we always went to the Adirondacks in the summertime because that's where all the big TB hospitals were. And her doctor went there. So we went to them, and we stayed at a place kind of like a resort. And there was a nice family there, and the family had 2 daughters who were college girls. And my mother was simply entranced with those 2 girls. And she said, I would like you to go to Smith College. So when it came time to go to Smith College in 1945, I knew exactly where I wanted to go. I'd never been there. But I knew it was where my mother wanted me to go. And it was a good choice.
Probably the best women's college in the country.
No, Wellesley was probably better as a women's college. But the problem with Wellesley was it was in a dry town. And in order to go out, they had to get on a bus and go to Newton or to Boston and go anyway. But Smith was in a nice town, like Tappahannock. It was a country town for farmers, and there were farms all around in the Connecticut Valley. The Connecticut River ran up through Northampton, up as far as Hanover, New Hampshire, and so it was. But Smith had interesting. I was simply thrilled. I would look at the calendar, and they set a calendar around. Smith was a lot of different dormitories. It wasn't one big building. It had some big dormitories, but I was in a small house with 27 other students, and most of them were seniors or juniors. There were only about 5 of us that were freshmen. And so, but anyway, I'd look at the calendar, and if there was a concert, I'd get on my bike and go down and go to the concert. And if there was a lecture, I went to the lecture. I remember going to one that was in French, and I didn't understand a word, but I thought, isn't this wonderful? I am going to a lecture. It's all in French. That was a long ways from Scarsdale, New York.
What was your major?
And I was lucky enough to major in economics, mostly history, economic history. I had people in my house were good friends, and we did a lot of things together. We celebrated birthdays, and we had played bridge. Everybody played bridge in those days. And it was very close to the center of the campus, which was the library. So I could walk I didn't have to ride my bike to class. I could walk over to the library. And then the classroom building was right nearby, too. Main problem with going to school in Northampton was that I had to take the train to get there. It was wartime. And at that point, I was living with my father's sister in Stamford, Connecticut, and I had to get on the train in Stamford and ride to Northampton. And the trains were crowded. I worked writing newspaper articles for the local Springfield newspaper of things that were going on in the college. This was just as a little, I don't know how I got involved with that, I can't remember. But my nice little house. We had one telephone in the house. So when the telephone rang, whoever was nearest answered the phone and then would shout up the stairs, "It's blah, 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 it's Dickie, and he wants to talk with Millicent." Or,
A lot of questions.
so at any rate,
So you had a.
I am still a Smith girl. I'm still interested in Smith College. I am an enthusiastic alumni. I have done jobs for the alumni. I haven't done much fundraising, but I've done other jobs for them. I was secretary for my class. I think Smith College has been fortunate in that people are much more respectful of women's ideas, and they really emphasize being positive with your ideas and positive with what you want to do with your life. And they make it very easy for you. They have a big, and to learn the things that you need to know as a woman in today's world. What?
Mr. Collins, how did you meet Mr. Collins?
Oh, by Mr. Collins. I met Mr. Collins after I had graduated from Smith College. Most of my friends in my class went to New York to work. They wanted to work for Time Life, or they wanted to work for the Herald Tribune, or they wanted to work in New York City at one of the big department stores. Or they do anything all the time. I went to Boston because my friend Sally had a summer house in Rockport, and I had visited with her. When she went home, I went to Boston to look for a job. And I found a job with Liberty Mutual. And my husband used to say, "Don't ever tell anybody you work for Liberty Mutual." It was right across the street from John Hancock. And I worked for Liberty Mutual for a winter, and I thought, I think I want to do something different than this. So I went to a placement type office for women and asked them what kind of jobs they had, and they had jobs in teaching. And I thought, well, I can teach history. So we recommended 2 or 3 schools that I might like to go to see, not a public school, but a private school. And I ended up in a school in Springfield, Massachusetts, which is just south of Northampton. And I was the history department. 2 years out of Smith College, and I was the history department. I taught ancient history, and I taught European history, and I taught American history, and I did the current events. I was the history department. And it was a nice little school, and the headmaster was great. I liked him, and he ran that school beautifully. When I was working for Liberty Mutual, I spent a good deal of time with my Wellesley friends, and one of the girls had a man who took her out, and he'd take out 2 or 3 girls, and we go to some beer place and have a beer, anyway, in Cambridge, and he and I, I can't say exactly that we fell in love, but we certainly didn't enjoy being with each other. He came from Marblehead, Massachusetts, and he was going to MIT, and so we spent a good deal of time going to concerts They had outdoor concerts in the summertime. The Boston Symphony played outdoors and concerts. And then he got a Rotary scholarship. So off he went to England for a year on a Rotary fellowship. You know what a Rotary fellowship is, okay? And he spent a year in Cardiff in Wales learning about miners and unions and all that stuff. And he also had to speak to the different Rotary clubs in that area and tell them about what it was like in the United States and what he wanted to do and all this. So anyway, one night he called the United States. And I answered the phone. And there it was. It was Bert Collins on the phone. And he wanted to know if he could propose. And at that point, I looked around, and the phone booth was in a hallway, and there were dormitory rooms. And every damn room had little girls leaning out listening to the phone conversation. And I said yes, and they all cheered. So eventually, he came home in June, and then the Korean War started. And he had gotten his degree from MIT, and he'd gotten part of a graduate degree because he worked on a thesis while he was in England, and he didn't want to go to war. And one of the ways that he could avoid being drafted was to get married. So we got married. We moved. At that point, he was living in Philadelphia, so we lived in Philadelphia for a short while, and then we moved to Massachusetts. And there I was in Massachusetts with a brand new baby. It didn't take very long. And we were living on the third floor of my mother-in-law's house. Here, there we were, living on the third floor of her house. She had a big old 1730 house in the middle of Marblehead, Massachusetts, right on the main street. We lived in. At that point, we had moved out of the third floor of my mother-in-law's house, mainly because my mother-in-law and my husband couldn't get along. They argued about everything. And it was so upsetting for me that I said, I'm going to leave if we don't do something about this situation, because I can't stay here with this constant nitty-gritty of each other. She was a very divisive person. We moved to Swampscott. Swampscott is the next town towards Boston from Marblehead. Marblehead, Swampscott, Lynn, and Boston. I think Revere was in there too. And my husband had taken a job for the Associated Industries of Massachusetts. And he ran conferences and he interviewed and worked for them for I don't know how long, but he had a lot of. It was easy to get along in Boston if your name was Collins. But we obviously, with 4 children and only 2 bedrooms in the house, we needed to buy a bigger house. So we went to a different community called Wellesley, Massachusetts. And the houses in Wellesley, Massachusetts mostly had 3 or 4 bedrooms. And we got a very nice house with 1, 2, 3, 4 bedrooms for $12,000. I had 4 children before I was 30 years old. In other words, I had them whum, bum, 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 bum. And then we decided we better not have any more children because it was getting to be an expensive proposition. My first child was Frederick Alexander Collins, and he had curly hair, and he was something of a clown. And when you went to take a picture of him, he made a face. The next child, the middle child, the next child was a girl, Sarah Elizabeth Collins. So Sally was named after her great-grandmother. And she was a pain in the neck. She was 10 pounds and 10 ounces when she was born. And at that point, we had 2 cribs in the same bedroom. And she teased that older brother so he couldn't get to sleep at night. We had to move them. We had to put him in bed in another bedroom until she got to sleep, and then she put me back in there. She was a fireball. And the third child was Malcolm Collins, and he was a very even-tempered child. The 4th child was David Lincoln Collins. It had good schools. My kids all went to the public schools. And they didn't play sports, but they played in the band. And my husband was not a sportsman. So he didn't encourage baseball playing or football playing or anything like that. But my kids joined the band and went to all the games as the band. So they all graduated with a good education, except for David. And David was not interested in academics. He was interested in cars. All my kids either had jobs, and there I was, home alone on Sunday. Before they actually went to college, I decided that there was an opportunity for women to get a degree, a master's degree, or any kind of college degree. And I decided I wanted to be a librarian. I had worked in the library at my kids' school, and I thought, well, I could run a library. I don't need to be the person who puts the books on the shelf. I can be a librarian. So I went to Simmons College to get a degree as a librarian, and you could get it one class at a time. So for 3 years, I went to Boston and to Simmons College and got enough credits to get a master's in library science. And then I had to find a job. And at that time, that was in the late 60s, there were a lot of guys going to college on government money. That was something that the government did to reward the soldiers who fought. And Boston was full of guys going to college. And the ones who were married, their wives got library jobs. A lot of them had couldn't working. Anyway, I couldn't find a full-time job. I could find a part-time job or a volunteer job. And then I went to this school, a private school in Wellesley called Dana Hall. And I talked to the librarian there and asked her, would she have any reason to hire somebody to work in her library? And she said, I would be absolutely thrilled if you would come. You could work all day Sunday, and then I wouldn't have to come in on Sunday. And you could work a couple of afternoons a week, and I could give you things to do. So I was working part-time at Dana Hall, and it was nice because on Sunday I wasn't home alone. I was at crime school having lunch with all the students, or dinner with all the students. It was perfect for me. Poor bird. And he wanted to move to Florida because his office was in Florida. And I didn't want to live in Florida. I liked New England. And I liked Smith College. So I said, no, I don't want to go to Florida. Well, he said, we can make an agreement. I could go to Florida and get a divorce, and you could stay in Massachusetts, and we would sell the house and divide it up, because we both owned the house, and divided up the money we get from selling the house. So that's what happened to Bert. He went to Florida. And it got to be close to 1980. You called me early, and I was still trying to sell my house so I could buy a smaller house in Wellesley. There were not very many smaller houses in Wellesley, I'll tell you. Sally Holland, she and Chris were living in Orange at that time. And she said, Mother, there are 4 full-time jobs in libraries in Orange County. Sell that house and get down here. Well, I went down and I looked at the different jobs, and I think I liked the one out at Lightfoot School. I didn't want to be in the public library. Too much politics. And I didn't think I could manage a school as big as Orange Elementary, but Lightfoot was just right. Students 4th grade through 6th grade because of the desegregation. So I went back. The house sold. I packed everything up. Had a huge rummage sale in the driveway. Piled everything else in my car and everything that the moving van couldn't take, and came to Orange in time for the opening of school in 1980. And I was the librarian at Lightfoot School.
So you came to Orange in 1980.
What?
You came to Orange in 1980?
I arrived in Orange, the first full-time job I'd ever had. I worked hard, getting lessons ready for the children who come into the. You can't take 40 children or 30 children in a library without having a plan for something to do, or they're all nudging each other. Sherman's. Oh, I lived in Freddie Sherman's mother's house. I rented it. Well, I was looking for a house to buy of my own. I would come home in the afternoon, or this was earlier, when I first arrived. I come home, I was living in a room in Sally's house, Sally and Lizzie's house, before I would move to Mrs. Sherman's house. And we go swimming in the pool at the President Madison Inn. It was just wonderful. Washed away all my sins. Anyway, eventually I found a real estate agent. He showed me houses all over Orange. And I said to him, I want a small house. I want a house with a level yard and a big basement. And that's just what I got. I've been here ever since. I worked for the school board for 4 years, and then I resigned under protest because they were going to have a larger class, 5th grade class, and rather than hire another teacher and divide the children into two smaller 5th grade classes, they were going to put all the children, 32 or something like that, in the same class, and that was too many. And I knew I couldn't handle 32 5th graders in the library. There was nothing I could plan that would keep me sane and them productive. So I quit. And there I was. I didn't have a job. And I can't remember who said something. Might have been Bobby Davis. Said, you might be able to get a job tutoring at Grimes School. They pay very well. So I went up and I did get a job tutoring 2 boys in the 6th grade. And I tutored them for probably 4 or 5 months. I still laugh about it. It was a funny affair. They gave us a little room. So I was teaching them what was I teaching them? I was teaching the one to speak English because he was the son of a winemaker down at Barbersville, and his mother wouldn't learn English. So when he went home, he spoke Italian. And so Federico went on to go to Woodbury Forest. I guess he went back in the class that he was supposed to be in. He wouldn't speak up in class because he didn't want, they would laugh at his pronunciation. And that's what I was trying to get him over, and we got him out of Grimes and into Woodbury Forest, and he came out number one in his class in Woodbury Forest. He's a very smart child, very smart. But funny, I just remember laughing at some of the things that boys, sixth grade boys are really fun. Anyway.
You became librarian there, didn't you?
And then there I was, sitting there without a job, and the girl who was the current librarian decided to take on one of the classes, and they didn't have a librarian, so there she was, right there, the librarian. She moved into the library, and I worked in Lightfoot School. Yeah. At Grimes School for 5 years. It was a part-time job. But don't kid yourself. Libraries are not part-time jobs. There are all kinds of things you have to do. It was a great job. I enjoyed it. I loved working with the students. We did all kinds of things. I made up all kinds of crazy research-type questions for them. And questions of evaluating what an author wanted to tell about in a children's book. What did Maurice Sendak want to say in Where the Wilds Are? What was he trying to tell you in that book? He didn't just write the book so he could do the pictures. He had a reason for writing that book. And the sixth grade children were very adaptable, and they didn't mind working like this in the library. I gave them time to pick out books, but we worked together on these different projects that I worked up for them. And then computers came in. And I knew the library had to be computerized. And I knew what plan I would pick to computerize the library. But I couldn't imagine how I could do it. And I didn't have a buddy or a group of friends or somebody who could help me with it. You need more than one hand, more than one person to do it. And wasn't it Pat Barnhart? Mm-hmm. She got together two friends and they computerized that library that one summer. They got the program going, they got the books all with their proper numbers. The students had their numbers. It was completely computerized. Wonderful. And I was retired again. What else do you do when you're 65 and retired? You go places. And I went to Italy and learned to watercolor paint. I went to Italy with a watercolor artist named Dixie Lee. She came from Bristol, Virginia, and she and her husband came, and it was La Romita School of Art, and it was an old monastery, so there were dormitory rooms, and there were probably 10 or 15 of us, and for 5 weeks we lived with them in the monastery and painted every other day. And the woman who owned the monastery and owned the business is named Enza Quagnoli. And Enza would organize trips for us to take, so we go to different villages in the Umbrian Hills and paint. And we went to Venice, and we went to the music festival at Spoleto, had to hire a woman who was a historian to tell us about Italian history and for the different places we went. It was a wonderful summer, absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
And then after that, I went to Rockport and took a class with a teacher in Rockport, Massachusetts. Rockport, Massachusetts is wall-to-wall painting teachers. And then I took another class in England, 3 weeks in England, painting with an English teacher, an English painter, and a bunch of people who came from California. And then I took another class with a woman. Anyway, I learned to paint doing classes with these, and then there were classes in Charlottesville. There was a Charlottesville Watercolor Society, and they would hire a teacher for a week, and we go down there and paint with her or him. We had one man come from New York City, and he did figures, and his idea was that you have to know how to do figures so you can put them in your pictures. So we spent half a week drawing figures, and the next week we spent going out and painting a scene and putting a person in the picture. Every year, the Virginia Watercolor Society puts on a show, and you have to submit you can submit 3 possible pictures that they might like to put in their show. And their judge would go through the pictures and pick out which ones he should go in the show. And I managed, over the years that I submitted pictures to the Virginia Watercolor Show, to get in 3 times, so I'm an artist member. They'd have to have a big show. They had a big show, for instance, in Charlottesville. And I was on the board for that show. And the show was in the rotunda at the end. And the other end from Cabell Hall on the green, there's the rotunda. And we had our show in that rotunda. Weren't we lucky? Not very many people get to have a show in the rotunda. But we did, up on the top floor.
What about the Art Center in Orange?
When I first moved here, I said to somebody who was an artist, do the artists ever get together? No, they don't. They like to paint by themselves. They don't want to get together with anybody. But Linda Marston Reed lived on Landon Lane. And she wanted to start a group of artists in Orange. So she got some people that she knew, a bunch of people that she knew were interested in art, and also people who were painters. And she invited me to come. And we went, and we had an evening, and we talked about what kind of a group we would like to have and why we wanted to have a group. And she said she would take over as the director until we got it going. And she had a fishbowl, and we all put money in the fishbowl as money to rent a place where we could be an art center in Orange. And we started out in that basement space. And we started in that space. And we had a show. And we had a gallery. And people could come in and look at the pictures. And we sometimes had a teacher. We had to have a volunteer in there. If we're going to open the door, we had to have a volunteer. So I volunteered one afternoon a week. And probably 2 or 3 years later, Bob Moran couldn't sell his furniture store. And he got together with Linda and he said, I'll sell you my furniture store. You can pay for it in a time, not all at once. And so all of a sudden there we were, the Art Center in Orange, right on Main Street. So we had an office, and we had a gallery, and we had a classroom. And you know, whenever they had a new show in the gallery, they'd have a reception. And that was one of the things that made people interested in the Art Center. It was fun to go to the openings and see all your friends and have a glass of wine and some kind of little sandwich. Anyway, and see the new shows. And they had a very active board of directors. And the board of directors selected the artists for the when they wanted to have a new show. They put out a call and said, we're going to have a show, and would you like to show? People would send some.
Tell me about the Olympics.
You could go to the Olympics and spend a lot of money on a very expensive hotel, or you can get somebody who specializes in organizing trips to sporting events. And that's where this California magazine, Track and Field News, organizes trips for people who want to go. They want to go to the World Games, they want to go to tennis matches, and they organize trips for groups to travel, to go to places like the Olympics. So I signed up for the Olympics. Actually, I didn't go with them for the first one. The first one was in Moscow, and there was a special office in New York just handling the tickets and the arrangements for Moscow. But when they got there, we had rooms in different hotels, and we had tickets to go to things that we wanted to go. And it was, and Moscow itself was what shall I say, it's not a place that you would go all by yourself. Definitely. But I went to Wellesley. I was living in Wellesley, and there was a Wellesley girl who agreed to teach several of us how to speak Russian. So by the time I got to Moscow, I knew how to ride the subway, and I knew how to read the little markers underneath the pictures. If I saw some pictures, I knew how to read the signs. Moscow was still the Soviet Union at that time.
Okay.
Moscow was flooded. The opening ceremony was breathtaking. I have never seen so many people piled one on top of the other, doing those wonderful gymnastic type things they do. It was wonderful. The events were interesting. I got a little nervous because I'm sitting on one end of a row and there are 5 empty seats, and then there's somebody sitting at the other end who didn't look like he was watching. I had the feeling he was watching me and telephoning him and telling him what I was doing. You could walk along the sidewalk if there were bushes. There were soldiers in behind the bushes watching people. It was wild. But the hotels were very comfortable. The food was delicious. I don't mind eating fish 3 times a week. You had a pass for the hotel. You couldn't get into the hotel without your pass. But you also couldn't get into any other hotel. You were stuck in that hotel, and although if you had a friend in that hotel over there, you couldn't get into his hotel. You had to make arrangements with him to meet him at a restaurant in town. And we went to puppet shows, and we went to the circus, and we went to the Olympics. Anyway. And then I came home, and that's when I sold my house and packed up my stuff and came to Orange. I went to Korea in 1988. And then I think next one that I went to was I know I went to Atlanta. I did not go to Los Angeles. St. Thomas Church. I went to St. Thomas Church because that was my parish church. And I was very faithful about attending church. And I enjoyed the women's group that they had when I first came here. That was before women began to get more interested in working and less interested in going to ladies' meetings during the day. There was President Madison Inn was across the street from the church. And I knew the people. I knew we made Christmas presents. We wrapped Christmas presents for them. And they had a Christmas party. And somewhere along the line, we came up with the idea that it would be nice to invite them to come for a meal to get them away from the turmoil of the inn. No smoking in the inn, no doing this, just no doing that. Anyway, so we got together in St. Thomas and talked about how we would do this. And several of the people who were there were saying, no, you don't want to do that. You'll get bugs from them. You'll get diseases from them. You don't want to, they're not worth doing anything with. And I said, no, we're going to do it. We're going to set up tables in the parish hall. We're going to cook a meal for them. We're going to let them know ahead of time that they've been invited. And we're going to go over there and help them get across Caroline Street, which was the biggest problem was getting them across the street without getting run over. And then we had to get the manager to understand what we were going to do. Her name was Ruby. She was a good manager, a very understanding type manager. And we told her, so she lined up the kids, the people who were going to come, who wanted to come. And then we escorted them across the street and found places for them to sit at the tables. The tables were all set with plates, with tablecloths and knives and forks and spoons and all that stuff.
What advice do you have for the younger generation?
For the younger generation?
Yes.
Learn to say something good about people if you possibly can. Learn and figure out what you do best. If it's what your talent is, if you have a talent, or look for a talent. Don't forget the library. It's got all kinds of resources for you and people who. What else advice do I give to the children? Of course, I'm a great reader, so I would say get a book. Be sure, find a book you like to read, and then find another book that's similar to that one, or an author you like and read that author. I don't think very many people do that. Don't just sit in front of the television all day. Be sure you get up and get out and do something useful.